You know, call making for me has always been about the ducks. Now, it's about the ducks, honker specs, and our culture. To me, the culture of waterfowl hunting is about our shared values, respect, beliefs, traditions, knowledge, and it's that underlying sense of connection that all waterfowlers share. This is the Ducklander Podcast, and I'm Bobby Hayes. Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm Bobby Hayes, and this is the Ducklander Podcast, and we are going to continue the equipment talk. Going to go over duck calls this week. First, I'm going to be up at the Maven Outdoors grand opening. I believe that is on Wednesday in Lander, Wyoming. I think it's on Wednesday. But you can always check out Instagram to find out more. Just in case there's somebody up in Lander that likes to duck hunt, likes calls, come by, say hi. Highly doubt it. But like I said, I don't think that's a waterfowl rich part of the world. I think there's more big game up there, but that's all right. If you're there, come by and say hi to me. So this week we are going to talk duck calls. Specifically going to focus in, if you're a new caller, what kind of call do you need? Or if you just suck on a duck call and you're trying to get better, you might not have the most efficient tool to get better with. So again, not trying to sell you a duck call. I do a lot of calling classes, ton of calling seminars, help people one-on-one. This is what I've had the best luck on, somebody learning how to call and getting some progression, getting better. So I'm going to start this off with going over the actual parts of the duck call, because I think this is fairly critical to understand how this little tool works. So for those of you not watching, I'm going to try to vocalize this so you can see it in your head. So we're going to talk about a J-frame style duck call, because that's what most of you are going to be blowing. So essentially we have three parts of a duck call, because I'm going to call the reed, and the wedge one part. So the barrel, that's the part you blow in. That's also the part that the insert, part that makes the sound, fits in and is held so you can make air. So you can make notes with your air. So, and then the reed and the wedge fit in the insert over that sloped area, and that's what makes sound. Blow air through it. So on the exhaust end, or the insert end, you have an exhaust. And that exhaust dictates the volume of the call. It can also dictate the back pressure. I'd say it's probably the main driver of the back pressure, but the tone board can have a little bit to do with that, or a lot, depends on how the call's designed. But for the most part, the general rule of thumb is the smaller the exhaust, the more back pressure it has, the less volume. The larger the exhaust, the more volume it has, and the less back pressure. So a good way to think about that is if you took your finger and you covered the exhaust end up so no air could come out of the call when you blow through the barrel, and you put air pressure into that call, that would be the maximum amount of back pressure you could have. So that means no air comes out. So all the air you put in is pushing back against you. So that's also how we feel air pressure. Little tidbit there. If you struggle and you blow a lot of air out of your mouth, and if you do that little exercise I just said, that will let you feel air pressure, as if you don't puff your cheeks. But so why am I telling you this? Okay. So the two most critical parts of choosing a duck call when you're new to this, trying to learn, is the how many reeds it has and how loud the call is. And I'm going to go over why those two things are so important right now. So I'm going to start with the exhaust, because I just talked about it, and I'm going to go to reeds. So a large bore duck call, you could also say full volume call, open water, a bunch of different slang terms for it. Doesn't matter. All you're really trying to say is it's got a large exhaust and it's got a lot of volume. That does a few things for you if you're trying to learn. One, and keep in mind, this is all opinion. This is just what I've gathered from teaching people how to call for so long. A larger board duck call, has more room for error in it. A smaller board duck call has less room for error in it. And you're going to need some forgiveness to find the right air pressure and tone. You have to have a large range in order to do that. And when you get a smaller board duck call, that range is much more finite, however you say it. So I like new callers to learn on a loud call. The second reason for that is, if you're new and you're learning, I need you to learn how to run a duck call loudly. I need it to have full volume, and I need the power. The reason for that is you cannot cheat the top end of a call or the power end or loud. If you make the right tone and you're putting the right air pressure through a call on the top end and you're running it to its max, so max volume, max rasp, all your mechanics have to be working properly to do that. You cannot cheat on the top end of a duck call. That's why on a Main Street calling contest, they run the top end of the duck call. That's why that's so predominant in that contest, because that is showing off the skill. Learning that teaches you how to blow a duck call softly automatically. It teaches you all the mechanics you need to know. So once a guy learns how to run the top end of a call, you will just naturally find the bottom end of that call. The other reason is duck calls don't work down. They work up. So by that I mean, if you have a large board call and then you have a medium-sized board call and then you have a small board call, the small board call goes to a certain spot and stops. The mid board call goes to a certain volume and stops. And they are just stopping at points that the loud call can do. The loud call, if designed properly, runs the full range of sounds, and it's just as quiet as the quiet call. So I'm a call maker, so I do for a living, so I probably shouldn't be saying it that way, because you'd say, well, why wouldn't you just run a loud call? It does everything. Well, it does. That's why typically when you're around a really good caller, they're running a full volume call. So now don't get volume and range confused. If you make a call properly, whether it's got a very small bore or it's got a very large bore, they should all run full range. So that's to say they're not necessarily making the tone of the call isn't necessarily different. Like you don't have a deeper duck or a raspier duck out of a large board or a small bore. It's the volume. But like I said, so another way to think about it is a small board call goes up to a certain volume, and the large board call has that volume in it. It just does that and more. So, learning wise, you need one that does everything. And that's just the way this works. Now, what a small board call does do, or a mid board call, is they make a different feeling of back pressure. And some guys like that more. Some guys like a free running call. Some of that also will be dictated after you've learned how to do this on how you like to call. A lot of times, if a guy likes to cut his notes real abrupt, he is going to want a full size board call, because he's cutting the notes off really sharp and quick, and that call can handle a little more burst through it. And if a guy likes to let the note fall, so instead of going ack, 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 he goes ack, he might like a little more back pressure. But all that is stuff that's nuanced, and you would grow into that as a caller. You wouldn't start that way. So I prefer a caller start on a large board call, and we learn how to call loudly, and he or she will just learn how to call quietly, naturally doing that. And the mechanics will be built by the time you get to that point, and then you can run anything. So the second thing you need to choose when you are picking a call to learn on, and this is just as critical in my opinion as the bore size, is how many reeds does that call have? So essentially, you can choose one reed or two reeds. There's some 3 and 4s out there, but we're just going to throw that off to the side. So you have one reed or two reeds. So that's single reed or double reed. And this is what I'm going to say about it. This is the same thing I tell like somebody coming up to the booth at a show, or I tell somebody in calling class. Uh, if you want to really learn how to run a duck call, you need a call with one reed. If you want to pick your call up when duck season starts, and you're going to mess with it during duck season, and you're going to throw it back in the bag, and you're not going to touch it again for the rest of the year, then a double reed may be better for you. So what's the difference, and why is all that? So first off, single reed and a double reed, neither one of them do anything magical. Improper mechanics in a bad note is a bad note, whether it has one reed, two reeds, or 10 reeds. None of that matters. What it does do, when you have one reed in the call, that reed can operate however it wants. When you add another reed on top of it, so you think of the bottom reed as the main reed. When you add a reed on top of it, make a double reed, That doesn't increase the amount of sound it makes. That doesn't add range. It doesn't do anything but limit the travel of the bottom reed. So you can think about that two ways. You can think about it as limiting the poor notes that will come out of the call or lessening them, but it also lessens the good notes. So no matter how you break it down, when you add another reed to a call, you're lessening the range of that call. So if you're learning and you're really trying to figure this out, you need to know what mistakes you're making, and a single read shows that off the most. So that's how we correct. So again, if you're really wanting to learn, you need one read. If you're wanting to just learn a little bit, you're never going to practice, two reads probably a good choice. I'm not knocking anybody that likes to double read. If that's what fits you, man, have at it. I'm just talking from a mechanical standpoint of teaching someone how to call. All single read duck calls have more range than double read duck calls. So that's just the way it works. Now, that's not to say you can't have a double read that has an amazing sound in a range. Like a good example, that's a Haydell's DR85. That call is amazing in its range, but it's only in that sector. It doesn't have the big top end, and it won't have as much bottom as a single read does. But if you like the sound in the range that the double read is making, then man, that could be your call. So I'm not knocking either one. I'm just kind of telling you how the call operates so you can choose what's best for you and what you want to do with your calling. The third thing you could choose is the length of the call. Now, for anybody familiar with my calls, I make two different barrel platforms with all the different inserts in them, and one is bigger than the other. So, like an LT or a fuse are on the small, or a mammoth cut, those are all on the small barrel platforms. They're very small calls, and there's a few guys that make a call in that size. They're fast, they're responsive, and I can get a little more rasp out of that size call than I can out of the bigger call. But the bigger call is more forgiving. So I usually like a new caller to start out on a full size call that's loud. That's kind of the go to. I've had the best luck teaching people with that tool than any other tool. So full size call in my line would be like a con artist or a center. But so pretty much my go to when somebody comes in the shop and says, "Hey man, I want to learn to call. What call do I need?" I give them a con artist. That's full size call, open water. Really hard to outgrow that call. You might find some nuances in the future that you want out of a call that it may not offer, but it does everything. It's full range, it's full volume, the whole deal. So that is kind of the basic breakdown of what you're looking for in a call. Now, why would a caller want a caller with a smaller bore? Why wouldn't you just want a loud call? Well, after you figure out how to do this and you get fairly efficient on a call or really efficient on a call, whatever level you decide to go to, some guys, some callers just like the way back pressure feels. So when we shrink that bore size down, it creates a little more back pressure. And if you're good at running a call, if you've got good mechanics, you can take, say, a mid-volume call and you can push the hell out of that call and get some good volume out of it. So you kind of wonder just like how important is maximum volume important to me, or is feeling more important to me? So about like a shotgun, you're after you learn how to do this, you're kind of working on what fits the best for how you run a call. We all run a call different. That's one of the cool things about calling. So that is the basis of how a call runs and works, and how you should choose one, in my opinion. What do I run? My main staple on my lanyard is an LT hand cut. That's it right here. I do nothing special to the calls on my lanyard. They are just like the calls you run. I have no other versions, but LT hand cut is my staple. I mix that up with a LT mammoth cut and a fuse hand cut, but LT hand cut is probably my 90% call. I never have two duck calls on my lanyard at the same time. One call starts a duck and finishes a duck. I don't flip flop it back. Like I said, if you become really adept on a duck call, if you're efficient on it, you can make from the quietest 10 to the loudest 10 with one call. I do it just to kind of switch up the sound. And I don't necessarily have those three calls in my bag uh, for the actual model itself, what I do is my fuse has a different read in it than my LT does. So the read is about as much a sound change as the actual call model is. So I typically keep a fuse in my bag with a bullet read in it, so it's a little whinier, a little more nasally sounding. My LT hand cut, I keep a fairly stiff read in. It's just a core read. It's fairly loud, fairly aggressive, but I can kind of do anything I want on that call. And then that mammoth cut runs like a cut down. It's got that barky, kind of real distinct, real choppy feed. So I'm really just kind of seeing or feeling what I think they might respond to more that day. So that's how I choose my call for the day's hunt. It's not really about the model itself. A lot of that is just how I got it tuned. That way I'm not swapping reads back and forth in the same call. So we could move this on to goose calls, and goose calls are quite a bit different than duck calls as far as a beginner call. Kind of the same, but kind of different. Um, Goose calling is very handsy, and by that I don't mean we're waving our hands all over. That's not what I mean. Hand position is critical on a goose call. There's not a lot of movement that makes sound different, but your hands are an integral part of calling of running a goose call. But when we learn, I like to teach people with no hands and get the fundamentals down. You should be able to make all the notes on a goose call without your hands. So if you can't, your fundamentals aren't right. Um, So on a goose call, if you're new and you're trying to figure out a goose call, or if you've blown a flute a really long time and you're trying to figure out a short read, then you need a large goose call. A shorter short read does way more than a longer short read does, but they're way harder to blow. They're almost so hard to blow that if you try to go from I have no experience or I've blown a flute my whole life and I want to do a short read and you pick a very short goose call out, you may never figure it out. They're just hard. So a good full size short read is about 6 inches, and it makes zero difference most of the time. Now, this can vary between all the different call makers, but most of the time it doesn't really matter if it's 4-inch barrel, 2-inch insert, or 3 and 3. Just the size is what makes the call easier to run most of the time, and it does that because it adds a little back pressure into the call itself, and you just need a little bump to learn. So most guys will start off on a long short read goose call, and then they will get better and progressively get the call shorter because they become faster, and you can get more notes out of them, more geese. But so just keep that in mind when you're trying to figure out a goose call. Is you're going to start with a call and you're going to end on a totally different call after you get adept at running one. It's just the nature of the beast. The exception to that is kids. Man, I can hand kids a small goose call and give them a few lessons, and they'll just pick it up and run with it. They don't have any habits yet. So if you're an adult, don't get that confused when you see a kid learn. Totally different situation. But that is kind of the breakdown. Spec calls are kind of a different breed, and there's no real. I wouldn't have a spec call suggestion for a new person. You just need to pick a spec call up and get some help with it, and they're really pretty easy to learn. I would say a spec just to get some basic spec sounds out are easier to learn than a short reed goose call is by a lot. It's pretty easy to get the call to just to break over and make a yodel. But if you need help with that, you're welcome to message me. I didn't mean to say it flippantly like that, but they're just not as hard to teach. So I'm going to end this on how do you know who to listen to on calling advice? Because man, I'm just like you guys. Occasionally I'll scan YouTube and kind of see what's going on out in the world in our waterfowl deal here. And I would say this: if the video starts out with "I don't really know how to do this" or "I'm not a good caller," man, just swipe to one where you find somebody that knows what they're doing. That person shouldn't be giving call advice. I'm not trying to knock them, but man, I could give you guys 20 people that are great at teaching people how to blow a duck call that are worth your time. So pay attention to who you are getting your advice from, because when you scroll through that thing, There are mounds of very bad advice on there. And I correct them all the time. I hear my peers correct them all the time at events. So, again, the video says I don't really know what I'm doing, then you might want to find a different video. Say, not trying to bag on anybody. I really just want you guys to get the best advice you can. I want you guys to hunt as good as you can. I want you guys to stay in the hunting pool. We need as many waterfowlers as we can get. So, if you do need help, you're welcome to message me. I got piles of videos on social, YouTube, all that good stuff that you can get all the advice from on Learn How to Blow a Call. Been putting it up there for years. Bunch of buddies that make calls that have the exact same thing. So lots of good places to get advice from. So until next time, I am out of here. I'm getting ready to head to Lander, Wyoming to see the Maybe.